Good morning and a warm welcome to the Armata webinar, which is Detecting and Defending Against Endpoint Threats and Attacks. It's a very exciting topic, and we've got esteemed panelists in the form of Wessel Pieterse, who's with Microsoft, and Emil Coetzee. So let me go ahead and introduce them. Starting with Emil. Emil is a seasoned IT and cybersecurity professional who's been around since the Y2K bug was a thing. In his role, he often assists teams with cleaning up their tech departments while mapping out their journey to improve cyber defense. So in my dealings with Emil in past life, I've really seen how critical it is to have a very technical person in the cybersecurity operations. And that's really why I've brought Emil into this as a panelist. He really understands threat hunting and infrastructure and all of the key things around cyber defense. And he's passionate about cybersecurity and really making an impact amongst cybersecurity peers. Wessel Pieterse is a seasoned professional with a remarkable international background in information technology, having spent much of his career in the UAE, Belgium, and Luxembourg. He's very well known in the Microsoft South Africa world. He has demonstrated a deep understanding of various security technologies and concepts, particularly around networking, security, infrastructure, cloud, and several more. He's 25 years working experience at the likes of Cisco, Amazon, and in the last 7 years with Microsoft is really the value of why he's a panelist with us. And we really appreciate you also taking the time to be with us, Wessel. And certainly from an Armata and a broader Braintree sister company in the Vivica group, we really appreciate the partnering with Microsoft South Africa, and we're looking forward to some incredible insights from both Wessel and Emil.
I'm not sure if I've lost you.
Of some of the lessons learned around threats and attacks at the endpoint. And the endpoint covers servers and workstations. So the agenda is, I'm now going to go to my keynote address as the moderator. Between Wessel and Emil, and we'll end off with a poll, just a couple of questions there, and then we'll close. So whilst we're thinking about that, Greg, could you post the 3 poll questions on Slido into the chat? And definitely, as our audience, feel free from now until the end of the session to respond to the 3 questions, the 3 polls, a multiple choice. And towards the end, we will share what the poll results look like. By way of introduction, I am Caesar Tonkin. I head up Armata Cybersecurity, and I've been in the industry for the last 13 years. I am known locally and across Africa and certain parts of Europe. And I've been a CISO in several organizations, and this is my 3rd executive head of running a business unit on cybersecurity. I've done this in 2 previous managed service provider organizations. Once we go through the discussion, we will really see the meat of some of the real world examples of what it takes to be able to detect and defend against very, very sophisticated attacks. Let me just quickly get into my keynote address, and that's a very brief introduction of what Armata is about. Armata Cybersecurity was established to strengthen basic and advanced cybersecurity resilience capabilities for customers in the Vivica group. So we're one of the several entities within the Vivica group, and our game plan is really to help customers to defend against cyber attacks and to put the basics in place, whether it's firewalls, endpoint protection, email security, or an outsourced cybersecurity operations, or a SOC service, a vulnerability management service. It's a very broad portfolio. There's a team of 30 people in Armata Cybersecurity, and as I said, we're part of the broader Vivica group. We are wholly owned by Vivica, and Our portfolio is in this slide, from consulting to managed security operations to advanced cyber defense services such as Microsoft Sentinel-based SOC services. And we've got some really good stuff happening amongst our 600 odd customers. And our game plan is to be a major player, hence on the continent. Hence, we're having these webinars between now and February next year, just to really create awareness of what we do. And it's very exciting times, and we're here to add value to you as the audience and to our existing and new customers as we evolve in our journey in raising the defenses for our customers. And I think this statement, this is very carefully thought through as cybersecurity peers, and many in the audience are actually in the cybersecurity world as well, whether you representing your employer or a service provider yourself. Our purpose is to protect organizations from threats and attacks that could be material to them staying in business. And it's important to remember that. What are we really here for? Is to make sure our employer or our customers can stay in business because we help them deal with business risk, which is cybersecurity risks. We're no longer the department of Dr. No, for those who've been in the cybersecurity world. That used to be how we are known. We're not. We want to add value. We want to be part of the value chain. We want to be part of helping our customers, our businesses grow, to protect their supply chains, to protect their sustainability as a business. We have a very strategic role, and it's really great to see that more and more excos and boards amongst our customers are recognizing the importance and assigning resources, budgets properly. And certainly you will see coming out of this webinar the pace with which the threat actors, the adversaries, have really targeted organizations, including in a big way South Africa. Ransomware attacks, if you follow in the headlines, the ransomware clop and other ransomware that just keeps on coming. It's just, this is BBC and CNN news just this week, and it's not letting up. This is a piece of research from Microsoft, and out of this, from a threat landscape point of view, 921 password attacks per second in 2022, which is a 74% increase from 2021. 93% of Microsoft investigations during ransomware recovery engagements revealed insufficient privileged access and lateral movement controls. That's really key. And if we think our ordinary antivirus and anti-malware is going to cut it, it's not. Not against sophisticated ransomware attacks. And the median time of 1 hour 42 minutes for an attacker to begin moving laterally within an environment, a customer's environment, organization, once a single device, which we often call patient zero, is compromised, is phenomenal. So we're helping customers right now to defend against a particular very, very prolific ransomware called Lockbit. And that particular customer, it's phenomenal how quickly that ransomware infected the entire organization, and luckily they could restore from encrypted backups, online and offline backups. But we are still helping that customer to really double check if there's any further what we know what is called breadcrumbs. In other words, how can they a repeat, almost a double extortion, because that's what the Lockbit ransomware attack is all about, a double extortion. It doesn't just that now that you've got the keys or you've restored from backup, they might come back at that, at companies, as they tend to with the double extortion, depending on whether it's Lockbit 1, 2, or 3. And 98% of it, cyber attacks, can be prevented with basics in place, the basic cyber hygiene. So from a Armata point of view, we offer both customers helping at the basics, cybersecurity hygiene, as well as advanced, such as our SOC. And EDR, endpoint detection response, is a key theme out of this conversation. As I said, the threat landscape, particularly around Lockbit detections, it's been detected all over the world across many, many geographies, and particularly targeting healthcare, technology sectors, financial services, and following the release of Lockbit 2, we saw an increase in Lockbit-related detections, which peaked in November 2021, and it is absolutely not letting up. And I think the attention on South Africa of Lockbit, which is a ransomware as a service, it's like an organization, very advanced. They operate as if they're a commercial organization. The pace with which they're targeting financial services and healthcare and technologies across the world, including South Africa, is something that we really need to be mindful of. And certainly Lockbit uses various malware tools and exploits to create harm. This particular slide shows, this is known as the Metro Attack Framework, and this shows the tools, tactics, and techniques based on the Metro Attack framework of how Lockbit operates. So when we do threat hunting, we also look at the Metro Attack framework to see what particular methods are they using to create the initial access. How do they execute their malicious processes? How do they persist? What privilege escalation? What's the lateral movement? What's the data exfiltration? And what's the impact? And there are very specific steps that they follow, some of which are widely used by us in the cybersecurity operations as cybersecurity practitioners. They also use the same tools, techniques. Sometimes it's very hard to detect what looks like normal system behavior, like a Microsoft process running on a Windows machine. They hide behind those standard operating normal processes, and before you know it, they've really created the impact. And that's the nature of the game we're at. It's not something that can be detected and prevented using signature-based antivirus, anti-malware. And Emil will go into a bit more about that. And it all comes down to threat intelligence. So knowing exactly what malware and malicious processes is moving around across workstations and servers, and mapping it back to threat intelligence from what is known as indicators of compromise is really where our partnership with Microsoft and other commercial and open source threat feeds helps us to really join the dots in terms of what the threat adversaries is doing to try and infect and create harm. And as security practitioners, chief information security officers, we really have to link, for example, a ransomware attack back to a business risk at an exco and board level. It doesn't live out of context. Okay, there are 4 predictions to conclude my keynote, and that is, and this is from Palo Alto Research on Ransomware and Extortion Report 2023. Extortion without encryption will rise. Threat actors will ramp up additional extortion methods. Insider threats will lead to extortion attempts. So often a ransomware attack is not necessarily only executed by a threat actor, external threat actor. They might have, done some sort of arrangement with an insider within an organization. It's not uncommon. And attackers will infect supply chains and source code of victims before using ransomware to distract from the supply chain infection. And for those who are following the trends, supply chain cybersecurity risk is a very, very key thing. Third-party risk management, especially of one's top 20, top 30 suppliers in a supply chain, it's really critical. And increasingly, so organizations that are dealing with suppliers, small to mid-sized businesses, are now starting to say, are my suppliers going to create cybersecurity risk? Are they going to be a way in which, as an attack surface, they can infect, through a ransomware attack, a phishing, from a supplier to us as the customer in the supply chain? Okay, so that's about all I wanted to cover. I'd like to now hand over to the panelists. We're going to cover these points, and that's about what is our current endpoint threat landscape, where is it headed in 2024, why should we consider adopting an endpoint detection response platform versus remaining with antivirus, what's the benefits of having an EDR platform, endpoint detection response platform, and how do we really automate some of that threat hunting, and then to sum up then the lessons learned, and then we'll conclude with the poll. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Emil on a few topics around the endpoint threat landscape. Over to you, Emil. Thank you.
Thank you, Caesar. Thank you for the kind intro, and this opportunity just to share a bit of insights. And I'm all for educating people and knowledge sharing. So hopefully, if you've gone away today, inspired to do some more interesting things in your environment, or you've learned some new interesting things, then hopefully we've done well as security practitioners. So, but I just want to sort of lay a little bit of what myself and my team are seeing in the current landscape. Typically, the most prevalent delivery methods are still phishing and business email compromise. And the business email compromise one is certainly, it's been around for a while, but it still carries on delivering because you're essentially, someone you trust and have dealing with or doing business with, or it's a customer. They get compromised and they send you links, here's an invoice or here's a project update or something like that. And those have you generally have a good chance of success depending on how they've crafted and where they've inserted themselves in the conversation. So typically those, ones that we're still having to watch out for. And then web, we're seeing quite a large increase in malicious sites being advertised in Google. And typically what they're doing is they're taking free tools or popular tools or popular topics like ChatGPT was, the thing of the month for a while, and pushing those up on the search engine rankings using advertising money, and then bundling malicious software or other payloads through those sites. So those are sort of things that are really sort of ramping up at the moment and people have to watch out for. And I think the thing we also need to consider when we're talking about endpoints that are under attack, it's really our end users or our customers that are actually being targeted, right? A lot of these methods, phishing and malware sites and those things require some sort of interaction from your user. So we also need to keep, our human layer of defense in mind, and how we're arming our users and customers, and how we're training them, and are they part of our journey? Are they part of our planning and how we're looking after them? So then Microsoft's been kind enough to finally disable macros for us. And that's caused a little bit of disruption in the criminal underground. So they've had to pivot and come up with new ideas, and they certainly have done that. So ISOs and disk images are being used, HTML smuggling, PDFs are back with embedded URLs. OneNote was also quite popular for a couple of months, and things like Windows scripting files. So again, it just shows that criminals will always find a way. They also quickly cotton on to new techniques, right? So the ISO and disk images with link files being quite popular. And we're also seeing now is a lot more obfuscation. We're seeing less malware payloads hitting the mailboxes, but you'll get that initial lure that takes you off to a site and then requires you to jump through some hoops. So again, this gives us opportunities to pick things up because there is more layers of obfuscation, and also train our users, right? How far down this rabbit hole should you really have to go to get an invoice from a legitimate vendor? So we should be keeping these things in mind, and how we engage with our customers and our users. And then we're also seeing quite a lot of abuse of free and or legitimate services. We've been seeing a lot of free established services, right? So it's not a new site, it's an established domain. It's got probably a reasonably good certificate on it, and they're using those for phishing landing pages or the initial lure to then send you somewhere else. And we've also seen some interesting things around phishing, abusing legitimate services. So QuickBooks is quite popular in certain parts of the world, and they've used that to send out PDFs or malicious invoices. And even very recently, Google's somewhat flawed implementation of BIMI, criminals quickly cottoned on to how they could exploit that and send out mail looking like they were from legitimate senders. And then kind of what we're seeing in the current trends and what will probably carry on to the new year, I think email delivery is always going to be an issue. I mean, it's an easy way into your organization. The malvertised sites, I think, will carry on. It probably will depend on how Google combats those. But if your business model revolves around advertorial money, then you probably have a problem there that you need to deal with in some way. I think more and more attempts to blend in with legitimate services to land payloads. I think the more sophisticated organizations, and probably the ones with deeper pockets, easy for them to either, something that compromised in AWS, or spend some money to host something in Google, or even Azure, just to try and blend in. Often those services are whitelisted in our organization, and we tend to trust them. So ransomware as a service, crime as a service, I think we're certainly seeing more of that. Just like we specializing in our own organization and industry, criminals are doing the same. So we've got now organizations just focusing on initial access, or just focusing on malware and payloads, and just focusing on ransomware. And that again means their tooling gets more and more sophisticated, more difficult to detect, and yeah, it is a challenge for us. Also, we've been seeing a lot, and I think is going to carry on, is as the corporate shore up, right? What's easier to attack now? Do I attack the individual that I know potentially has access into that organization or rights in that organization, or would I attack him in his work persona? So we've seen things where people are lured through LinkedIn with job offers and then sent malicious payloads and PDFs and other documents. And that access is then being used to pivot from that person's personal environment into the corporate environment. So I think those opportunities will pop up. Supply chain, and again, specifically looking at an endpoint, from an endpoint perspective, a lot of our tooling, our MDM tools, our EDR tools, and other things that we use to manage our endpoints with, have a lot of privileges on those endpoints. So, if one of those were to breach, attackers would have quite a large leverage into your organization. And typically from that point of view, I think, maybe a little bit more way out there, but it's potential that we should have in the back of our minds. And then again, as Cesar also said earlier on, the pace at which threat actors adopt new exploits or new methods, that is continuously ramping up. The time that you have to respond or remediate just becomes shorter and shorter. Thanks, Cesar. All right, then typically I thought a little bit, what are their objectives? What are they after? So the things we're seeing a lot of at the moment are info stealers. They're quite popular in the last couple of months, and they're dumping credentials out of browsers. So that means all your SaaS apps, other interesting things out of there. Browser order fill information, so personal information, credit card, and a lot of that information is then used to, either unlock other parts, things where they're asking for personal information, or do some sort of impersonation attacks. Crypto wallets, API keys, and also importantly, what I've actually left off here is cookie theft, right? We've all been rolling out MFA and beating the MFA drum, and the way around MFA is to steal cookie and session tokens from people. And again, where we now have to counter that is start reducing the time on those cookies or those MFA tokens, bring those down to 24 hours or maybe 16 hours, depending on your organization, just to try and stop that from having a negative impact. Backdoors, and typically these, differ from who's breached you. So often initial access brokers will just breach a company and then sell those credentials onto someone else, or they'll use it as a foothold into further recon for your organization. Data exfiltration without ransomware, as Cesar also said, we're also seeing an increase in that in popularity, because people have gotten good at backups and restoring from backups and saying, well, we don't care about your ransomware. So I think the focus is going to shift more and more on juicy data exfiltration, and then ultimately the final might be ransomware, and still continues to be ransomware. Botnets largely have shifted more to IoT and consumer router devices and those sorts of things. But where they are still useful is relay services. We all, if most people are trying to block Tor from a corporate environment, but if you have other exit nodes in the form of a botnet that you can funnel traffic through, those are useful to attackers. And DDoS carries on. We just saw some major ones this week. Microsoft was on the receiving end of that one, but those will continue, and no one's immune to that sort of attack at all. Thanks, Cesar.
Right, thanks very much for that, Emil. And I think it's about joining the dots. Emil has painted the picture from a endpoint threat landscape, and Wessel is now going to share with us the insights around antivirus versus EDR, and then he will lead into a discussion around the endpoint threat landscape and how does an EDR platform such as Microsoft, really detect and defend against that with some automation. So over to you, Wessel.
Thank you, Cesar. Thank you, Emil. And nice to see some familiar names popping up on screen. So probably what some of the, the current state that we currently see most organizations that we're talking to at the moment is whenever we walk into a large organizations, the security teams are very proud to talk to us about the number of tools that they have, the number of detection techniques that they have in place, endpoint detection, they have network protection, etc. When companies talk to us, and sorry, I'm not sure why I'm seeing only half a slide, but many of the companies talk to us and they say, well, we have a very active antivirus solution in place. What is it that Microsoft's talking to us about EDR? Well, it's very important to note, especially in the context of Emil's previous conversation now, since computers have been around, there's always been somebody that's been trying to gain access to those computers or gain access to the information contained in those computers, either to steal the information or to disrupt a particular workflow or cause disruption in an organization. And since the early days, I can remember, back in the late 90s, when I was getting my 386s and so forth, every time I would get a machine, I would get an attached CD with the latest and greatest antivirus software attached to it on a CD. And effectively what antivirus was about is it's really about you getting a piece of software onto your machine, workstation, or even these days mobile devices. And it works with a number of signatures where it's basically looking for known signatures, known files, known worms, whatever the case may be. It's a table, it's a file, it's something that basically says, here are all of the known files, all of the known bad actors, etc., and it does a periodic scan of your environment. But given what we just heard from Emil about the ever-evolving state of attacks, we'd like to start making the industry start thinking in a different way, almost thinking about the industry in an assumed breach type of manner. And that's what EDR does for us. EDR is more of a holistic approach where we don't necessarily, yes, we do still look for certain signatures of viruses that are coming through the environment. But what we're most looking for is we're looking for a sequence of events, certain behaviors. We start using more machine learning to start seeing, okay, what are the known incidents? What are the known behaviors? What is a typical state of a particular endpoint? So if I am Vessel and I am somebody in HR, should I be having should I be writing code, or should I be having code sent out on my PC? It's probably not the right thing to do. So what EDR does is it basically does a lot of the functionality of the antivirus software, but it also ties in a lot of the machine learning and AI capabilities to learn certain behaviors of machines, of networks, of endpoints, whether they be Windows-based, Linux-based, iOS-driven, macOS-driven, whatever it is. EDR solutions really look for those malicious actions and behaviors rather than relying on a certain set of files or signatures that we saw in the AV world. In the world of Microsoft, we're in a very fortunate position. If we are going to start using machine learning and artificial intelligence to learn certain behaviors and learn new attack techniques and learn how to defend against them, Microsoft is quite uniquely positioned through the use of our four major clouds, Xbox Cloud, our Office 365 Cloud, our Azure Cloud, our Dynamics Cloud, and so forth. Together, on an annual basis, Microsoft detects and responds to over 43 trillion signals in a single year. It's a lot of signals for us to be taking in. We take those signals in not only through those major clouds, but also we start aggregating information that we receive from key customers, from key partners in the industry, sometimes even government agencies. we take all of these signals, and just to give you some interesting stats, in the last year alone, 37 billion of those signals came from email threats. What's more alarming for me is the rise in identity threats. In identity threats, we had over 34 billion identity threats coming through our signals in the last year. So we definitely see a rise or a change in behavior where in the past we would typically see some sort of virus being emailed through to an end user. They open a file, a malicious DLL goes forward, and that machine is then compromised. So now we have to start really thinking about or assume a breached state wherever we are. And that's where Microsoft's Defender 365 comes into play. Defender 365 uses this anomaly detection or behavioral detection across endpoints, emails and documents, our apps and multi-cloud environments and identities. And it really starts looking for what is the state of those emails. When we see emails, when somebody clicks on an email, if we're opening a Word document, it wouldn't be natural for that Word document to be starting off a PowerShell script or to be creating shortcuts or DLL files. So it immediately uses machine learning to say, wait a minute, this is not a normal behavior. Maybe we should quarantine this particular file or execute it in a sandbox type environment. Similarly, when we start seeing identities being compromised, our our Defender 365 solution really starts looking at it and says, wait a minute, why is Wessel Peterser working on his workstation, plus at the same time he's trying to assume administrator control on our web servers, plus on our Active Directory controllers, etc. So EDR is more than just an antivirus solution, where antivirus worked on a certain set of just signatures, where it looked for certain profiles or certain known attacks, did periodic scans for those and helped us work through them. Our EDR solution is really looking at more at behavioral sciences behind it. So it's looking for almost those zero-day attacks. It's even without knowing the signature of a new attack, a zero-day attack, it will already start saying, hey, wait a minute, this is an unknown behavior. Maybe I need to start looking at this and quarantining and screening it either with some automated type of response or just quarantine that information for a user to intervene. And I think that's the key thing is, you know, with EDR, whereas previously in the past, an antivirus solution would typically see something is wrong and then just quarantine it. In the world of EDR, we really start looking at using machine learning and artificial intelligence with the behavioral analytics, and we start applying the response, so immediate response. We don't wait for a human to intervene a few hours later or so forth. I think, Caesar, you mentioned in your earlier slides, you know, we're seeing a typical, from the time a machine is breached until there is lateral movement in organization, Microsoft's intelligence predicts that it's on average 1 hour 42 before the attacker is already moving laterally within the organization. So we don't have time for us to just quarantine a particular machine, but in the meantime, an identity has been compromised and the adversary is already moving laterally in our organization. The EDR solution really looks at this behavior and it immediately at this in machine speed starts looking at which emails were compromised, which machines were compromised, which operating systems were compromised, which identities were compromised, and at machine speed either automatically remediates it if it knows how to remediate it, or it automatically quarantines it even while the adversary is moving laterally within the organization.
So let's get on to maybe just to sum up before we come back to Wessel, between the two panelists, your thinkings of what is really the key business benefits of adopting an EDR. Emil, would you like to kick off very briefly?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as we've seen, you know, attackers are rapidly changing the environment and what they're operating in and how quick they are to leverage things. And we need to look at the behavior. Wessel spent quite a lot of time emphasizing the behavior in. And I think for me, Caesar, you and I have spoken a lot about, what are we doing for the SMEs and the smaller companies, right? They can't necessarily afford a SOC or a full-blown outsourced service. I've kind of, dubbed a managed EDR services like the poor man's SOC, right? So invest in an EDR tool, make sure it's managed so you can sleep at night. Again, if you've got a small team, you're not going to have a 24/7 operation, but, invest in a good EDR solution and back that up with a solid partner who can look after that and wake you up at 2 a.m. on a Sunday when there's a problem, and hopefully just say, look, we picked this up, we've contained it, things are under control, let's chat on Monday. That's kind of, I think, where if you're an SME and you're looking where you need to spend your money, it's kind of how I would look at it.
Thanks very much. Emil, your thoughts there, Wessel?
Yeah, I think for me, it's very much the same. The speed at which organizations are being attacked at the moment is what's of most concern to me. The number of attacks, the speed of attacks, the evolution of attacks it's outgrowing the pace that humans can respond at. So what you do need to do is you do need to have this level of automation and machine learning in your organization. You need to partner with an organization that does, like Microsoft, take trillions of insights on a daily basis and be able to feed that out to organizations. So an EDR solution is critically important for you. No single human is able to respond at the speed at which organizations are being attacked and compromised at the moment. So absolutely. And I think partnering with somebody that can manage all that intelligence for you is also equally important.
So let's get on to using the Microsoft EDR approach, the solution. Let's talk about automation, or the automating detection and response mitigation. For me, that's really the benefit. Can we give customers that sleep easier at night feeding because of automation? Do you want to just weigh in there, give us your pearls of wisdom there, please, Wessel?
Sure. So, in the world of Microsoft, we spoke about, we need to, when we talk about EDR, we spoke about antivirus, we spoke about EDR, but up until now, we're really talking about endpoint detection and response. In the world of Microsoft, endpoint detection and response is important, and you can see that our EDR solution really spans across multiple operating systems. It spans across multiple clouds. We have the ability with our Defender to have Defender for Cloud, where we start going into not only into Azure and Office 365, we're going to GCP, AWS, Oracle, you name the environment. But I think it's important for companies as they're starting to assess their security posture, and I spoke about assumed breach, is how do we automate the detection of these anomalies, automate the response to them, and make sure that we provide the best possible mitigation strategies. And at Microsoft, we have the pleasure of having both our XDR technology, which gives us the depth of security on an endpoint type environment or in a cloud type environment. But when we combine it with the breadth of Sentinel, Sentinel is our SIM that we have inside our organization, identity. What Sentinel allows us to do is it actually allows us to be able to take signals from a number of third-party services. In most organizations, we can have up to 40 different security systems in an organization. Sentinel allows us to integrate into 40 analyzers, into Cisco devices, you name the security devices that an organization may have. We'll be able to take all of those security incidents and logs and be able to correlate them, analyze them, and put them into a human readable format that makes sense to organizations. So in the world of Microsoft, when we talk about the automatic detection and response to security incidences, we really talk about our endpoint defense strategy, combine that with Sentinel, which correlates data from multiple different services in the organization and puts it all together into a single unified cloud. Let's quickly look at what Microsoft's unified security portal looks like, because I think the challenge that we're seeing in the market is the security analysts, while they're able to detect and see all of these different responses, the biggest challenge that they have is the speed at which they can respond to it. Why? Because typically, if you do have up to 40 different systems, antivirus systems, network security systems, etc., how do you correlate all of that information to make meaningful data that you can use to actively and speedily respond to these security incidents? And what we're showing on screen here is Microsoft's Unified Defender portal. And what it does is when we combine Sentinel and our EDR capabilities, we take all this information and we correlate it into a single pane. And here's a typical example of what a security analyst, when they walk into the office in the morning, what they'll typically be seeing. So first of all, what we do is we've tried to correlate all the information from all the different systems into a single pane of glass. So the analyst would walk in, they would see that overnight or over the past 24 hours, there's been, in this case, 35 active incidents. It will give, and let me just see if I can get a laser pointer going, then you can probably see where I'm talking. 35 active incidents. We in the top left-hand corner, if let's say a CISO is interested in identifying what is a company's security score, the security score is where we actively manage a company's security posture over a rolling 90-day period. So we start seeing, how do they rank? Are they addressing all of the identified security assessments and suggestions on how to improve a security posture? We've included a security score screen where a CISO can basically come in and see, are we improving our security posture or are we not? We see the active incidents over the past period. Our XDR capabilities allow for the solution to not only detect all of the active incidents that are happening overnight, but we also allow the solution to automatically remediate those threats that are well known to us, where we have existing playbooks or where the industries created playbooks to mitigate certain threats. So a lot of times when we might have active incidents, you'll see that only 20 of them are pending a certain amount of approval. And that's because in this particular incident, or in this particular case, 15 of those incidences were automatically dealt with or automatically responded to using the machine learning and artificial intelligence. The other thing about our new and improved unified dashboard is a security analyst always needs to stay up to date with information. So we've included trending news from the industry, latest blog information, everything that an analyst needs to know to stay up to date. We've got it all from the single pane of glass. From your home screen, you get all the latest information. The nice thing about this new action pane is also the abilities, and you'll see as we drill down over the next few slides, we'll drill into different panes of glass in the unified dashboard, is that there's never a case where where your analyst will know absolutely everything. There'll always come a time when there's a new threat or a new type of action being taken against our organization and we need a little bit of help. In the bottom right-hand corner, we've just introduced a new button where we can start introducing a threat experts functionality into our unified dashboard. Threat experts is where we start seeing unknown incidents or activities or anomalies in our organization, and we don't yet have a remediation pattern in place to fix that. When you click on this need help button, that gives any organization that's on a Microsoft E5 using our Defender capabilities the ability to connect to one of our 8,500 security experts, which are security experts that are experts in malware, antivirus, threat hunting capabilities, you name the skills. When you click on that need help button, it gives you access to any one of those 8,500 security experts that we have in the organization. Just before I actually move forward, is the other thing that we do have is when and I'll take you through some of our hunting capabilities and so forth in the next few minutes, but one of the things that we do also do is we also have the capability to integrate APIs into this unified dashboard, and that's very important because, as I mentioned, time is of the essence. When we are attacked, we need to make sure that we are responding timelessly before there's lateral movement in the organization. So integrating third-party solutions into the environment through our API integration is ultimately important for us to be able to ensure that you can bring all your various different security solutions into the same single pane of glass and give your SOC analysts actionable insights, not just from the endpoint, but from your various security solutions in your organization. So when you click on the alerts queue from the previous pane, in this particular example, we see, what we have here is all of the known alerts that were coming through the various different systems, whether they're network security, whether they're endpoint security. We basically have all of the alerts that come through onto the alerts queue. You'll see that they are over here, they are collected together or collated together. And I think that's very important because remember, I spoke to you about organizations typically having a plethora of different security solutions. And when you need to correlate all the logs and statistics to be able to understand how that attack happened, what was the path for it entering the organization and how did it move laterally? Well, what we start doing is we start correlating that information and we start correlating all related logs and alerts from different systems into a single alert queue. And what that allows us to do is, in this example, we see on average about 1,000 encounters a day for large enterprises. When we start correlating this, we start taking all those encounters to a minimum of around, we see about 70% reduction in the number of encounters that a particular analyst needs to go through. And remember, we don't want our analysts to be flooded. We want them to be able to focus on the most important tasks at hand. So when they are clicking through 1,000 encounters, they're wasting their time. So we need to be able to correlate it and make sure that we can reduce that as much as possible. The other thing that we start doing is when we start looking at incidences, if we had to click through one of those alerts that was on the previous page, you see that we start putting all of those alerts and incidents into a chronological order, so into a time-based order, so that you can see exactly what happened throughout the life cycle of that incident. Who was the user? Where did they click on? Which device was affected? Which mailbox was affected? Which endpoint was affected? We see that when we go through that particular incident, not only do we have a great life cycle, but when we start collecting evidence, we see an evidence trail giving us all the artifacts related to that. We can see all the alerts. If we clicked on devices, we'd be able to see exactly which devices. So you can see that all of this information is ultimately very important for a security analyst to be able to make an informed decision as to have we effectively found the incident? Have we effectively isolated it and remediated so that there isn't that recurring attack? The other thing that you see here is that we recognize that throughout the industry, all vendors are calling attacks by different names. So it's important for us to correlate that. We do have integration into the MITRE attack frameworks. And what we start doing is we start correlating that data to make sure that it is meaningful and that you start seeing commonalities and correlated alerts. One thing that we haven't started speaking about is the auto healing capabilities. And auto healing is really the ability, and we start seeing the ability for us to start using technologies like ZAP, things like zero-hour purge. Zero-hour purge is one of the tools and techniques that we use within the Microsoft environment, where we start saying, okay, well, we've seen a particular attack coming through a mailbox. When it happens a second time, even though that we see, what was it with emotet attacks these days, it's very hard for us to know exactly what that attack is going to look like because it's polymorphic. It's ever changing. It's every single day that attack is changing. The signatures are changing. The way it executes is changing. But with our machine learning, we're able to start correlating that. And what our zero-hour purge capabilities allow us to do is once we detected it once another organization has detected it once, because we're correlating information from so many different, these 42 trillion different sensors that we have around worldwide, we're able to help organizations to immediately be able to detect that, even though it's morphed in whatever shape or format, and be able to automatically do some self-healing either isolate the mailbox, isolate the user if it's identity that's been compromised, whatever the case is. Automated self-healing is really another one of those great tools that we have in the arsenal to help us take those multiple alerts and incidents and bring it down, let the system do a lot of the automation, resolve it so that the security analyst gets on with only the most important information that's available to them. The second last thing that I just want to talk to about is our unified investigations pane. And this is really where we start saying we can take that same incident and we can put it into a graphical format. So again, using the same, we can see the same amount of alerts, we can see the devices, but oftentimes when we start visualizing it, when we can say, okay, the attack happened through this port on this firewall or through this endpoint, and then it compromised this identity, then it went laterally and it compromised another identity and so forth. Oftentimes, it's not only nice to see it in a chronological format, but also the ability for us to see it in a graphical format. It often provides that extra level of information that an analyst may need. The last thing that I want to talk about is our advanced hunting capabilities. So it's not only important for us to be able to defend against attacks, but sometimes we clean out the attack only to find out that a week or two later we're attacked by the same thing. And that's often because these attackers leave behind little crumbs behind so that they can re-attack. And even though you might think you cleaned up of your ransomware, 2 months later they come at you again and they go again. So our advanced hunting capabilities is absolutely important. And the nice thing about our XDR capabilities here is because we are so integrated with the plethora of all of your security solutions that you have in your organization. When we start, if you think about responding with 40 different systems, most of these systems have a GUI interface and you can go do some queries and it gives you a standard format. So then a security analyst has to print it all out and try and correlate it. What we start doing in the Microsoft Unified Defender portal is we give you query languages like you're seeing on screen here, KQL, a common query language that we see out there in the market, widely used across a lot of Microsoft services. We actually have the ability to start scripting the way that we go after these attacks in organizations and start querying multiple systems and seeing even further, this is something new, what do we do with it? And we start querying it using code and common languages that we have out there in the market. Sorry, Cesar, I'm not too sure if I spoke too much or too long. I can't see the time anyway, but hopefully that helped to give you some view into how Microsoft thinks about automating the detection and response to incidents in organizations.
Wessel, that's really super duper, and it really speaks to what this webinar is all about, and just thinking about helping a couple of our customers currently where we are engaged on threat hunting and compromise assessment. It all just, for me, it's confirmation that we really want to be doing this to help our customers to stay in business, to be able to quickly get back into business if they're hit by a ransomware attack. So I'm now going to move on to some of the lessons learned, and I'm going to kick off, pose the question to Emil first, but feel free, Wessel, to weigh in. So if we have to reflect on your years of experience around threat hunting and this conversation in this webinar, what would those lessons learned be? What are the key takeaways for our audience there, Emil?
So I've kind of looked at this as, more lessons learned around, looking after your endpoint. So I think often overlooked is security policies, how we respond to incidents, what's acceptable use and those sorts of things. And those are important because either that helps you define what you should be doing in your organization. And again, if you're engaging with a vendor, they often want to see your policies and acceptable use and those sorts of things to try and gauge where you are in your maturity level and what they should be delivering as a vendor. So those should be given some thought. I'm a firm believer in company-owned devices. Bring your own device for me is out. Everything should be MDM enrolled so the organization knows where all their assets are and they can manage them all the time. No administrative privileges. So typically local admin is given to machines in a lot of organizations. That should be a firm no. Patch aggressively. So in our team, we've worked quite hard to bring our patching levels, following the Patch Tuesday from Microsoft quite closely. So we've got a test ring now. pretty much within the day that's released, they got 48 hours to patch in the test ring. And then we let that soak for a couple of days. And then the rest of the organization will then also have 48 hours to reboot. Gone are the days of giving people a week with the pop-up prompts and things to do their patching. We're getting those done as quickly as we can. And typically, if you're looking after the OS, the browser, your Office tooling, Microsoft and Acrobat Reader and those sorts of things, covers most of the entry points and what people are poking at. And then you just need to look at, the outliers. So you've got things like there was a recent paper cut event, things unique in your environment where there's now some hot topic, fix those. We'll do most things for you. And this should be automated. If your tooling is broken, your patching is not working, fix that first, right? Get that done. You shouldn't be wondering whether your patching is working. Your patching should be covering, the high 90 percentile of your environment automatically without any intervention. If it's not, you've got problems you need to fix first. CIS benchmarks, again, time consuming, doesn't cost you money, it just costs you time and effort to implement and test them, worth doing and hardening your operating system. Application allow lists, again, bit of work and effort. Often you often find yourself arguing with vendors. I think needs full admin privileges or must run all over the place. Work those things out. Web traffic monitoring, again, exfiltration is a big deal now. If you've got endpoints floating around and you don't know what their web traffic is looking like in the machines, you have no visibility there. And again, this EDR is part of this, framework that you can use to look after your endpoints. I don't know if Caesar, you got anything else to say, and we can do some general stuff.
I think we've covered it, and certainly these other lessons learned that we've shown you. There's no magic product to solve all your problems there. Security validation and security culture, I just think those are good points as well. So in the interest of time, we now want to get onto our poll, what the results look like, and in that, when I show those polls, we'll also then come back to any other final lessons learned from both yourself and Wessel. Okay, so you can see my screen, and we now showing the poll results. Thanks for those who did participate in the poll. I think we had about 52 participants. And so in terms of the question, which is, which of the following endpoint threats concern you most? Ransomware, phishing attacks, zero-day exploits, malware. We had 16 participants, and ransomware won the day. No surprise. Phishing attacks and zero-day exploits. I think that's all there. Then the next one, which is what endpoint security measures are currently in place in your organization? Regular software updates and patching, antivirus, and or EDR, endpoint detection and response. I'm not surprised about the first one. I think it speaks to what Emil was emphasizing, and it's the basics. Getting the cybersecurity hygiene in place means regularly updating software and patching, running antivirus, and then I think, to this audience, it's really key that you take away the lessons and say your antivirus is not going to be cutting it any longer. And I think Wessel really hit home the point, as well as the endpoint threat landscape that Emil highlighted. And I mean, even in a particular customer that we're helping right now, their sentiment is, well, we've got a particular antivirus tool. How come we were still hit by a ransomware attack? Well, I think this webinar has helped clarify that answer. Then lastly, what are the main challenges that you face when it comes to endpoint threats and endpoint security? limited visibility in endpoint activities, lack of budget and resources, or keeping up with evolving threats. And limited visibility into endpoint activities, I think that makes sense. Certainly, the 16 people who responded to this questionnaire really feel they don't have enough visibility and don't feel alone. Big corporates, blue chips, enterprises also feel this way. And increasingly, organizations are adopting EDR plus a 8x5 or 24/7 security monitoring as a SOC. So thank you very much for participating in the poll. And we'd like to then conclude just to recap on some of the lessons learned, and not from the slides, but from an open conversation, just for no more than a minute. Wessel, over to you. Last parting words. Just one statement?
I think for me, on the slides, we captured all of the best practices, but the one thing that we probably didn't capture on the slides was it's good to have all the tools and insights, but it's also important to partner with the right people. I think Microsoft has a lot of good insights and our tools are good, but it's also important to have the right people to be able to implement them and put them to good use. So choosing the right partner to take the security journey with you is equally important. And thank you, Armata, for inviting me today. Thank you.
We appreciate your guidance here, Wessel. Thank you. Emil, your parting statement?
I think for me, educating your staff and having them as part of your journey into cybersecurity, and your training should be uplifting them. It shouldn't be a stick to beat them with. That for me is the main thing where security training and environments fail, is just beating the staff down with negative results, failing phishing tests. Uplift them, embrace them, help them on that journey, and they'll become part of your security team by extension if you treat them well and train them properly. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Emil. Okay, so thank you very much, Wessel and Emil, for taking the time and spending, sharing some of the insights and lessons learned. We really have got a lot to think about, and we will be sharing with the audience the slide deck, as well as the upcoming webinars that we've got between now and February. So thank you very much for taking the time with us, audience, and we're looking forward to you participating in the next one, which is on email security in July. And we wish you well and have a great day. Thank you then.
Cheers. Goodbye.